Coming up, the local lessons of Ferguson. And what lessons has Jay Nixon learned from one of the biggest tests of his governorship? Also this week, the latest on the race for Kansas governor. And we truth check the latest Brownback ad. Is it all smooth sailing now for Kansas Senator Pat Roberts? Plus, what next for streetcars? And are you really that satisfied with your city government? Welcome everyone, I'm Nick Haynes. It's great to be back. In fact, we've been away so long, this could be a month in review. The great news is that our news reviewers are up to any challenge I'm ready to throw at them. Steve Kraske is battle-tested as a longtime writer for the Kansas City Star and the host of Up to Date on KCUR-FM. Garrett Haake covers the political beat for 41 Action News and has been tracking the local implications of the Ferguson shooting and the subsequent wave of protest. Eric Wesson is a senior reporter for the Call newspaper, and Dave Helling is the Star's political reporter. He's also a blogger and columnist for our daily newspaper. It is the story that continues to dominate our local TV newscasts and the front page of our daily newspapers. It's the story of a town 240 miles away from downtown Kansas City. Almost 2 weeks after the killing of a black teen by a white police officer, Ferguson, Missouri remains the site of racially charged protests, though the Missouri governor has now called for National Guard troops to begin withdrawing from the town after several days of easing tensions. On Wednesday, the nation's Attorney General Eric Holder swept into Ferguson, promising a fair investigation into the shooting death of 18-year-old Michael Brown. There are many places you can hear the details of the story, but on this program we're going to track some of the local implications and some of the wider political ones that impact our area, including the response of our elected officials. Criticized for his slow response was Governor Jay Nixon, who took 5 days to visit Ferguson and 9 days to call out the National Guard to help restore order. But is Governor Nixon still licking his wounds this week, or is he being unfairly blasted in what some have argued is a no-win situation?
Well, he's still licking his wounds. There's no question about it, Nick. He's been hit hard by columnists all across the country, really almost ever since this situation in Ferguson began. As you just pointed out, 5 days to get to the site of the shooting in Ferguson. That's too many days in a situation like this, and the governor's going to be paying a big political price going forward.
But was this a no-win situation for Jay Nixon, Eric?
He could have won if he would have gotten on top of it early. There was an opportunity and a chance for him to step up as a leader, not only for the state, but as far as the Democratic Party goes, he could have been a leader. But I don't know what he was thinking, and it might be, as some black elected officials have said, his disconnect to the black community. He has no black staff members. He has nobody to say, hey, this is a real serious issue. You need to get on top of it. So he pretty much sat on the sidelines while the city was burning almost.
Garrett.
And he was almost entirely reactive to this situation. I mean, other than a statement early on, he took no proactive measure until what was then the worst night of the riots there, before ultimately saying he was going to cancel his appearances at the state fair and come back to be in Ferguson. And if this is a national debut for Jay Nixon, which for a lot of folks it might have been the first time around the country seeing him on television, he flunked it. And the idea that this, that when he's term limited, where he goes next, this will be people's first introduction to Jay Nixon around the country. For a lot of folks, not a good start.
But this is a very astute man who was one of there in Joplin, feeling the pain of people. Right. Why then this reaction on this story, Dave?
I think we're all trying to figure that out, actually, because I think he did get wide praise for his reaction in Joplin. A little different situation in terms of the immediacy of the tornado damage was very clear very quickly. And as one person told me this week, he didn't really have to do much in Joplin other than show up and sort of direct whatever state emergency response there was. This is a much more difficult, complicated situation. And just to be a bit of a defender of Jay Nixon, had he shown up much earlier, he might have caught a little bit of grief for sort of elbowing in to get publicity. He got a little of that in Joplin, so he was in a little bit of a difficult situation. But at this point, Nick, the merits aren't really important. The fact of the matter is the damage is serious, and it will be ongoing, and it will extraordinarily complicate his relationship with the General Assembly, both in the veto session and next year, because his moral authority to sort of lead the state has been damaged. Regardless of whether it was good or bad or how, again, the merits of his reaction, Republicans will pounce. Democrats are not going to be on his side. It's just a poor week for the governor.
Let's be real clear. he needed to be there. Dave's points aside here, there's a history here with Jay Nixon. It's been pointed out any number of times since this crisis began. It's worth pointing out again. This goes back to the early 1990s, shortly after Jay Nixon became Attorney General for the first time in 1993. Lots of struggles with African Americans over busing and desegregation in St. Louis. To this day, there are members of Congress. Emanuel Cleaver is one of them. Lacey Clay over in St. Louis is another. African American members of Congress who still don't trust Jay Nixon completely. It all stems from those days back in the early 1990s.
In 1998, Jay Nixon ran for the Senate. Emanuel Cleaver was the mayor of Kansas City and would not endorse Jay Nixon, the Democrat, in that race. He wouldn't say he was voting for Kit Bond, but everybody knew that was the case. That's the level of the estrangement between the African-American political leadership and Jay Nixon.
There are so many places where you can hear about what's happening in Ferguson, a very tragic situation. We want to talk about a lot of the local implications. You did a story this past week about what some of those local implications are, Garrett Haake, on 41 Action News. One of those has been there's been an uptick in the number of complaints lodged by citizens against the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department. Why should that be?
Well, by all accounts, Kansas City's police department doesn't have the same level of problems that a smaller department like Ferguson does in terms of its community relations, but it does have some. And what I was told by the folks who handle those complaints is they were seeing people come in and say, look, maybe this happened a little while ago, maybe this wasn't a big thing, but this needs to be on the record. They're trying to create a paper trail, trying to really make sure that these things are discussed proactively before they become an issue. And so there is an office, the office that accepts, there's an office that accepts complaints that does not have uniformed police officers, and they're telling me that they don't feel like people even know that they exist. I mean, this was a group that was formed after the '68 riots. They've been around for 45 years, and people don't know they're there. There needs to be this outlet, and you're seeing people seek it out with these horrible pictures playing on television to try to find a way to prevent that.
So people are feeling more empowered, Eric?
And I think in addition to what he just spoke of, I think the real issue is registering people to vote. One of the things that I learned in Ferguson and talking to people there is that they didn't realize until now that the mayor is the person that appoints the chief of police, who is responsible for training the police officers. So now what you had in Ferguson and here is you have an upswing in people registering to vote in the black community. In Ferguson, they said 15% of the people voted there, but I probably think it was probably lower than that. But the people now are realizing the power of the vote. So in Ferguson, there were a lot of voter registration drives going on in the time that I was there.
You know, just quickly, Nick, there's a long-standing history of big city departments, small city departments that struggle to recruit African-American members into its ranks on police departments everywhere. Kansas City has a long history of trying hard, but a force that's maybe, 13 or 15% African-American in a city with an African-American population far bigger. That's a problem. There's lots of reasons for it, but it needs to change going forward.
You know, I was in a meeting this week, can I just say, with an influential Kansas City, and there were a number of people there who said that Kansas City, we need to care about this because Kansas City is a hairbreadth away from what was happening in Ferguson from happening here. Is that an exaggeration, Eric?
That's an exaggeration. I think that there's a better relationship between the police department, elected officials, and representation than it is in Ferguson. Ferguson, they had 1 black on the city council. They have 3 blacks out of 53 on the police force. So I think it's a lot difference in the communication.
You remember, the mayor in Kansas City is African American. The chief of police in Kansas City is African American.
But this was wasn't happening though in St. Louis. This was happening in a different outlying community of the city. Could this happen in an outlying area of metropolitan Kansas City?
It could happen anywhere, Nick. That's very clear. But there are, people doing their best to make sure it doesn't happen. Ferguson may have had some relatively unique challenges that don't exist in a lot of other areas in our neck of the woods and make it less likely.
There is a very good analog here to this. I was doing some research this week. The city of Grandview, about 23,000 people, about 40% African American. It's the highest percentage of any of our suburban communities here. Grandview, with 53 sworn officers on the police force, has 1 African American police officer. So there are analogs within our area where things are closer to that dynamic. But again, you don't hear about a lot of racial tensions in policing in Grandview despite those numbers. So no, I don't think we're as balanced on the knife's edge as your source indicated. But there's some of those same dynamics absolutely exist in some of our communities here.
Eric.
In 1960 in Ferguson, there was a chain that went across the main street that was a symbolic of blacks don't come into Ferguson. So you had a totally different atmosphere, a history in Ferguson than you do in Grandview. Grandview, you probably don't have police officers talking to people in the same way as Ferguson. So you've got a lot of different dynamics. The poverty level is different. The educational system is different. So I don't think that it's as oppressive here or in Grandview as it is in Ferguson.
One of the other concerns or threads that you heard from what happened in Ferguson was the militarization of the police. Another part of a report that I saw in 41 Action News was that area police forces also have a huge amount of military vehicles and surplus supplies, just like we have seen in Ferguson as well.
Absolutely.
Garrett.
The Pentagon is...
Including Johnson County and Clay County?
Clay County, Missouri. The Pentagon is giving these things away. Over Easter weekend, Clay County sent 2 officers to Houston. They picked up the keys to an MRAP, a mine-resistant, ambush-protected, armored vehicle with glass plates as thick as this coffee cup. All they had to do was hand them the keys, and they drove it back up I-35. There was no training. There was no follow-up. It was, all right, you guys know what to do with this. Good luck. Now, Clay County, their tactical vehicle was a 1984 ambulance. They did not exactly have the best equipment for this, but the Pentagon is giving this stuff away. And if you give these to police departments, they will find a way to use them. And certainly there are valid uses for this equipment, but lining them up on the streets in a show of force, perhaps not one of them.
Dave.
Yeah, good thing there weren't any mines along I-29 on the way up there, because obviously the vehicle would have protected them. But I did write a column about this. There is bipartisan concern about the militarization of police forces. It isn't just Democrats. Republicans, Rand Paul wrote about it. Claire McCaskill is going to hold hearings on this idea. They've met with the Pentagon. I do think one of the things that will come out of the Ferguson incidents will be some emphasis on trying to de-ratchet, if you will, this militarization.
In other news this week, tough-talking New Jersey Governor Chris Christie was in town to campaign for his friend and fellow Republican Governor Sam Brownback. Along with a Mission Hills fundraiser, Christie ate barbecue with the Kansas governor at Oklahoma Joe's. They also took time to shake hands and take some selfies with the lunch crowd. A new poll out this week shows Brownback slightly behind in a tight race with Democrat Paul Davis. Davis leads Brownback 39% to 37%, according to Public Policy Polling. The poll has a margin of error of 3 percentage points. A poll from Rasmussen released last week showed Davis with a much more comfortable lead at 51% to 41%. It's still early. How much do people really know about Paul Davis? And once the Brownback campaign goes in full gear with more information on him, won't these numbers start to change, Steve?
Perhaps, Nick. A key moment in the campaign right now, the state of Kansas, when voters are asked in polls where they stand on this race, this is purely a referendum on Sam Brownback. Folks don't know anything about Paul Davis. They may not for a while, which is why it's a key moment right now. We're hearing anecdotally of massive TV buys underway right now in the state, hundreds of thousands of dollars going to be spent on Governor Brownback's behalf to criticize Paul Davis. They're going to try to define him early in this race as an Obama Democrat, as a liberal from Lawrence. If they succeed in that, that might begin to change those numbers. Paul Davis may not have the financial resources to go up on TV already. We're only in August, after all, for a November election. But this is a pivotal moment, and Paul Davis has to be careful that the way he's defined in the eyes of Kansas voters might take place right now.
Garrett. And the term of art here is to kill him in the cradle. The Brownback campaign has to make Paul Davis an unacceptable choice for Kansas voters, and they have to do it in a hurry, because Davis's only job is to say, I'm not Sam Brownback. But the number that interests me there the most is from the PPP poll with Brownback at 39%. If you're a sitting governor with 100% name recognition and you're not hitting 40% yet, that's concerning. They can lower Paul Davis's numbers, but if people are that fed up with Brownback that 60% of voters say he's not my guy, that's concerning.
Well, Brownback is out with his own new ad that tries to set the record straight about his own accomplishments. We truth check the ad.
When I started as governor, we had a bad situation. No job creation, no money in the bank with $876.05 in the state's checking account. We ended this fiscal year with right around $400 million, and we've grown jobs. We've got over 50,000 new private sector jobs. Record number of people working. We're putting more money in public education. One of the lowest unemployment rates in America. The sun is shining in Kansas, and don't let anybody tell you any different.
Is this just the governor setting the record straight, as the governor claims, Dave Helling?
Well, the sun is shining in Kansas. It's
Check.
going to be 100
Check
degrees
marks on
today,
that
so
one.
something is going
Okay.
on. The rest of the claims at least need some exploration. According to some figures, there are a record number of people working in Kansas, and the unemployment rate does hover around 4.8%. But this claim of $876 in the bank is bunk. That was the amount that was claimed by one accountant 6 months after he took office. If you look at the actual financial statements of the state, there was probably $100 million or so in the bank. He didn't have $400 million at the end of the fiscal year. It's much less than that, in part because revenue is less than was projected for the state of Kansas. You know, what Garrett was talking about is so important. Sam Brownback needs to muddy the waters. And to the extent that he can muddy the water about the actual facts of his time in office, he will succeed. He needs to make this about ideology, about how people feel about their government generally. And so he's been throwing out numbers like this for some time in an effort to obfuscate the record, to make it more about philosophy and ideology. If he can do that, he'll win re-election, because more people in Kansas agree with Brownback than Paul Davis.
But
Paul Davis has to make it about the record.
But Paul Davis has also been accused of fudging the numbers on the campaign trail, too.
He has, but not to the extent that Sam Brownback has and continues to
Okay,
do.
Eric.
When Brownback first got into politics and got elected to things, people didn't know a whole lot about his record and his history either. But as he came in with his policies, people started to shift, and he hasn't been able to change that shift to where he should be like 60, 70 points ahead in the polls. But one thing that I found interesting was him bringing Christie into town and not you know, that's like bringing Rick Perry in right now. I don't know what the purpose of bringing him in was with the baggage that he's got.
Well, the purpose is to A, raise money, and B, awareness. There is some irony that a New Jersey governor would come to Kansas and eat at Oklahoma Joe's. Maybe it's a national campaign.
Good choice.
But right.
Yeah.
But my point is, Sam Brownback is worried about something, because when he brings in surrogates like Rick Santorum and Chris Christie, when he starts running ads, when third-party ads are going up in August, he says, hey, the sun is shining in Kansas. It isn't shining on his campaign, and I think he senses that.
There's some rain clouds around when you really get to look at it. Their credit rating has dropped under his
By
administration.
2 different rating agencies.
But Steve, can I just ask, though,
Yeah.
isn't Sam Brownback still considered the favorite in this race?
Well, he's the favorite because it's a bright red state, and he's a Republican governor, and he's the incumbent, Nick, who can raise more money. But by every political metric that folks like Dave and I and Garrett and Eric look at, Sam Brownback is in deep trouble here. This race is going to draw the attention of the nation, given all that.
As our summer membership drive kept us off the air since Election Day, we have not had a chance to laser in on Kansas Senator Pat Roberts, who may still be nursing a hangover after feeding Tea Party candidate Milt Wolf, who I might add never ended up debating him. Since no Democrat has won a United States Senate seat in Kansas since the 1930s, is it now smooth sailing for Roberts right through Election Day in November, Garrett?
Probably. Chad Taylor and Greg Orman are going to divide the anti-Roberts vote fairly neatly in half, and Pat Roberts will most likely win re-election without a majority of votes in the state of Kansas. He has the same advantages that Sam Brownback has, 100% name recognition, Republican in a Republican state, and even though a lot of people may be dissatisfied with his leadership, neither one of those two other men has emerged as a clear alternative. Orman has run a pretty good campaign for a guy without national party support whatsoever, pretty decent name recognition for an independent. Most people probably still couldn't pick Chad Taylor out of a lineup, and that's going to be a huge problem.
Okay, you agree with that, Dave?
I do, although I think Pat Roberts is far weaker than you would expect for a guy that's been in office since 1980 in the state of Kansas, and again, a Republican state. And so the dynamics of the campaign could change. But I will say this, if anybody really at the national level gets the sense that Pat Roberts is really in trouble, they'll pour hundreds of thousands of dollars into the state in third-party money, because if Pat Roberts loses, the Republicans have no chance of taking over
They need that
the
seat.
Senate. Right.
Okay, let's move back over to the Kansas City, the Missouri side of the state line. When voters earlier this month said no to expanding streetcars in Kansas City, did that spell the end of the line for the project? Now, that city and transit leaders have had a chance to lick their wounds from their defeat at the polls, where 60% of voters rejected plans to add to the current 2-mile starter line, now under construction between the River Market and Union Station. Is there any consideration to bringing a different plan forward? Are those dreams dead, Eric?
No, there's probably going to be another plan to run out Main Street, because there was some support in that area. Run out Main, probably to UMKC and cut over. It won't come east like the original plan, or like the last plan was, because there wasn't the support there. Although I think the Yes people ran a bad campaign. They weren't up on TV with commercials. Their yard signs people didn't connect to them because they didn't know what Connect KC was. So I think they ran a bad campaign, but I don't believe it'll come east again for economic development purposes.
The mayor did a better job of explaining why this was a good thing after it was defeated than I think they ever did in the run-up to this,
Right.
talking about the importance of this running east and west. But they didn't. The conversation was poorly handled in that campaign. I'd be very surprised to see any version of this show up on a ballot before the starter line is up and running again fully.
When is that going to be?
That's a great question.
Well, it's next year. I
Okay.
think they'll get the starter line. At least that's the game plan. But it may be years before they try.
But we do have on the ballot in November Clay Chastain's light rail proposal, so we could be having light rail in Kansas City before then.
Boy, wouldn't
Steve?
that be something? And what a mess that would be, Nick. Light rail costing so much more than streetcars. And based on the vote, you can't imagine that something like that could pass, but stranger things have happened in Kansas City. It just strikes me that given where we stand today with this starter line, it's a toy train line. It's 2 miles. It's nothing. But to have that and nothing else is an embarrassment for a city that still wants to regard itself as competing with the Dallases and Denvers of this world. If we can't go past 2 miles, we're going to look silly. And I think Mayor James knows that. So I would look for some plan, maybe along the lines of what Eric talked about, sometime in the next year.
And in addition to that, I think one of the upswings is that it would still happen during the Obama administration, where you've got a relationship with the Secretary of Transportation, and they do have his ear as far as putting together a plan. So I wouldn't be surprised if he brought it up before he leaves office.
Kansas City's annual citizen satisfaction survey is out, and despite all the negative issues you may hear at times, 3 out of every 4 residents of Kansas City, Missouri say the city is good, if not an excellent place to live. Mayor James commented that satisfaction with Kansas City's image is at its highest level since the city began its current citizen satisfaction survey in 2005. But that doesn't mean there aren't issues. Fewer than 28% had good things to say about the maintenance of streets and sidewalks. Less than half were satisfied with public transit. Now, isn't that interesting that less than half were happy with public transit, yet voters just turned down streetcars and a max bus line on Prospect?
It is interesting, and these are basic functions of city management where the city is doing poorly. I mean, the image is high is interesting and positive, and maybe a lovely outgrowth of all these events that we've hosted and things like that. But in the basic blocking and tackling of city management, to have those numbers slipping a little bit is sort of problematic.
We just boiled down just a couple of those scores, though. What else did we learn from those city satisfaction scores, Dave
Well, I
Helling?
think, as usual, there's great satisfaction in public safety, police, fire, sort of basic services, less with other things. Kansas City needs to figure out mass transit one way or the other. I mean, it's, not just light rail, but buses. Mark Huffer, the ATA head, is leaving because apparently there are some concerns about the metropolitan impact of mass transit. We just can't figure that riddle out for whatever reason, how much we should spend, where it should go, what we should have. And I do think that's a problem for this community.
There is no culture of mass transportation in this town. I've
right.
said it on this program before. There's just not a sense of what it even should look like, who it should be for, where it goes.
And how much you should spend on it.
There's no unifying sense of that this is what we would use this for.
I think one thing we learned from a survey like this, Nick, is this sense of how voters feel about their mayor. There's oftentimes a correlation between these scores and how they feel about Mayor Sly James on at least this set of metrics. He comes out pretty well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I agree. And I think now with the police having the violent crime down, even though this was an older survey, with violent crime, especially homicides being down, I think people are very satisfied with the public safety.
Can I just say very
aspect.
quickly, but having said that, he will have an opponent. Sly James. It won't be. He won't go unopposed in the re-election campaign. We've already heard some rumbles about some of the people in the community whose names you will recognize who do plan to run.
Like who?
I can't say that.
Oh, come on,
Giving it to
Dave.
me off the record.
Tomorrow morning. Oh, we have to wait for that.
Wait for the paper.
All right, before we leave you this week, a recognition to the Kansas City, Missouri School District, which long maligned and beat up on, scored a big win while we were showing you pledge specials over the last several weeks on KCPT. The district defying critics by earning provisional accreditation.
It's a good day today in the Kansas City Public Schools. The last time this district was provisionally accredited was 2006.
Kids in the district also went back to school with no negative headlines, and this week district leaders were vindicated when a state audit blasted the Missouri State Board of Education for bias and conflict of interest when it entered a contract with an out-of-state education reform group a year ago that proposed overhauling the entire structure of Kansas City schools. Mostly we talk about problems on this program. Is there something refreshing about a string of positive news to report on the Kansas City, Missouri School District, Steve?
You know, absolutely, Nick, and give Stephen Green all the credit in the world for turning the ship around, at least to some extent here as we move down the road. There are still work to be done here. We're only provisionally accredited. English scores, math scores, still not what they need to be. That will be on his agenda
Eric
here.
I agree with Kraske. Academically, there was very little to no improvement, and that's what's important.
And that is our week in review. Our thanks to our news reviewers, the host of Up to Date, weekday mornings at 11 on KCUR-FM, Steve Kraske, and the Call senior writer, Eric Wesson. From The Star, Dave Helling, and from 41 Action News, Garrett Hake. From all of us here at KCPT, I'm Nick Haynes. Thanks for spending part of your weekend with us.